In 1915, a joint eugenics venture was brokered by John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone, and Mrs. E.H. Harriman, mother of the future statesman Averell Harriman. They had already consolidated their monopolies in oil, railway, steel, and the banking industries. So at this point, they sought to preserve their vast wealth and advance their interests by investing in methods to control and reduce populations. The goal of eugenics was and is to eliminate people whom the elite deemed inferior genetic material. They funded a massive lobbying campaign for the enactment of laws to sterilize those whom they deemed unfit. Sterilization laws were first enacted in 28 states in the United States. Their objective was to sterilize 10% of the American population, that was 15 million Americans. This was to be accomplished under the guise of improving public health and the human race. U.S. sterilization laws served as the model for the Nazi racial hygiene laws. For over a century, the Rockefellers have continued to be the largest financial backers and drivers of eugenics and the depopulation agenda. So this is what mostly I want to talk about, the 1918 Spanish influenza. It's estimated that it killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. This catastrophic pandemic has been encased in a false narrative for over a century. An examination of the facts reveals a plethora of similarities between that false narrative of the pandemic in 1918 and the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. The 1918 pandemic did not emanate from Spain. It was not a flu, nor was it caused by a virus. By misidentifying it as influenza from Spain helped to conceal the true nature and origin. In 1918, as the United States entered World War I, the military was expanded to 6 million men, of whom 2 million were sent to the battlefields of Europe. Scientists at the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now the Rockefeller University, seized the opportunity to test an experimental vaccine on this now new available pool of human guinea pigs. Few people realize that disease killed far more soldiers on all sides than machine guns and mustard gas or anything else associated with World War I. In January 1918, an experimental meningitis vaccine made from the pus of horses was tested on soldiers. Dr. Frederick Gates, board president of the Rockefeller Institute and trustee of Rockefeller Foundation, began the experiment at Fort Riley, Kansas in January 1918. In his 1918 published report, he notes that the vaccine was given in 3 random spitball doses. Not exactly accurate. 4,792 men received the first dose. 4,257 got the second dose. And only 3,702 received all 3 doses. Dr. Gates doesn't report what happened to 1,090 men who did not show up for the 3rd dose. Gates wrote that shortly after being injected, soldiers exhibited flu-like symptoms, including cough, vomiting, and diarrhea. The reactions, he said, simulated the onset of epidemic meningitis. But Dr. Gates brushed it aside and declared it was not actual meningitis. One wonders what science Dr. Gates relied on. Influenza outbreaks were reported at 14 of the biggest armed force training camps. Recovered troops carried and transmitted the infection to healthy soldiers in the battlefields of Europe. A 2008 report surveyed worldwide fatality and mortality rates during the pandemic. They described how bacteria rapidly spread from infected people to others, particularly in crowded settings, such as hospital wards, military camp barracks, troop ships, and mines. Now, further evidence was obtained from something like 9,000 autopsies worldwide. The autopsies proved that the 1918 flu was not a flu. According to the autopsy lung cultures, bacterial pneumonia killed at least 92.7%. When World War I ended on November 11, 1918, soldiers returned to their home, spreading the killer bacterial pneumonia worldwide. One of the most important eyewitnesses was Dr. Eleanor McBean. She witnessed the human carnage at the age of 13. She and her African-American family did not get vaccinated. They remained healthy throughout the pandemic. She became a doctor and authored several books, including The Poisoned Needle, 1957, Vaccination, the Silent Killer, 1977, and Swine Flu Expose, 1977. She provided very vivid descriptions. I'll read a little bit. When the flu was at its peak, all the stores were closed, as well as the schools, businesses, even the hospital, as the doctors and nurses had been vaccinated and were down with the flu. No one was on the streets. It was like a ghost town. We seemed to be the only family which didn't get the flu. So my parents went from house to house, doing what they could to look after the sick, as it was impossible to get a doctor. If it were possible for germs, bacteria, virus, or bacilli to cause disease, they had plenty of opportunity to attack my parents when they were spending so many hours a day in the sick rooms. But they didn't get the flu, and they didn't bring home germs to attack us children. None of our family had the flu, not even a sniffle. And it was in the winter with deep snow on the ground. Dr. McBean identified the experimental bacterial meningitis vaccine as the primary culprit. She wrote that only those who were vaccinated perished. Sound familiar?
It does.
Can such a vaccine-generated catastrophe happen again?
No.
I think it needs to be really, this example is, I believe, extremely important, given the players. Okay, number 7. In 2018, PBS, that's public broadcasting, aired a documentary, The First Wave. The documentary fills in some of the gaps that Dr. Gates failed to disclose. We learned that by March 11th, the Fort Riley camp surgeon was confronted with the first wave of the pandemic. 100 men a day were entering the infirmary with the same malady. Some 2 million U.S. soldiers were injected with the Rockefeller experimental vaccine. It sickened them and weakened their immune system before they were shipped to Europe. Now, when the war ended, the Rockefeller Institute sent the deadly meningitis concoction for use in civilians in England, France, Belgium, Italy, and other Western European countries, thereby spreading the epidemic worldwide. Was the decision to ship the deadly vaccine abroad once they already knew what it was doing? Was it just for profit über alles, or was it part of a eugenics genocide playbook?